The Nikon Z6II can do these amazing looking time-lapse videos done at night. And the best part is, the feature is already built into the camera. You'll be able to post these high quality 4K videos right away. And in this video, I'm going to show you how. And I'm going to give you some clever tips and tricks to make sure your first video looks amazing. Time-lapse videos will require you have a tripod. And I'm going to assume you're using the kit lens that came with your camera. So let's begin. Let's turn our camera on. Now we're going to make sure we're in camera mode. You don't want to use video mode for time-lapse videos. Now let's put our camera in manual mode. It's right here on your mode dial. We'll cover camera settings later. But first we're going to set up your first time-lapse video. Let's press the menu button. Then you're going to use the photo shooting menu. On this page near the bottom, you're going to see an option for time-lapse movie. Press OK to select this. Once you're in the time-lapse movie menu, you're going to see all these options. The first one is called interval. This is how much time you want between each shot. To make a 10-second video, your camera is going to take 240 images. And then it's going to make a time-lapse video out of those. The interval is also going to depend on how long of a shutter speed your camera requires to get a well-exposed image at night. For example, if it takes a 10-second exposure, you need an 11-second interval. If you're taking a 20-second exposure, you need a 21-second interval. So for the purpose of this video, let's set our interval to 11 seconds. The next option is called shooting time. This is how long you're going to have to wait to start the time-lapse process until it ends. And once again, this is also going to depend on how long your intervals are. So let's scroll down to shooting time. Right now our interval is set to 11 seconds. So let's change our shooting time to 20 minutes. To do this, hit OK on shooting time. On this screen, you can now choose the shooting time. I'm going to use the down arrow and choose 20 minutes. Notice when we choose 20 minutes on the bottom left-hand corner, you're going to see some blue numbers. Based on our intervals and our shooting times, this indicates how long of a time-lapse video we're going to create. So at 20 minutes, we're going to end up with a 4.6 second time-lapse video. That's not nearly enough. I like to have between 10 to 15 seconds. So let's increase our shooting time to 40 minutes. You're now going to notice those values in the blue numbers have changed. We are now going to have a 9.2 second video. So we're getting closer. Once we get to 44 minutes, with an 11-second interval, we're going to end up with a 10-second time-lapse video. That's a lot of waiting, but it's well worth it. So let's hit OK to get back to our main screen. Let's look at the next option. It's called exposure smoothing. We're going to leave this on. Your camera's going to make sure that the exposure for each shot is the same. This will make sure you don't get flickering in your video. The next option is called silent photography. This makes sure your camera doesn't make a sound while you're shooting. You can leave this on. If you keep scrolling down, you'll have another option called frame size. Because you spent all this money on this nice camera, you might as well get 4K. So let's hit the OK button and now choose the 4K option at 24 frames a second. This is my favorite. Then hit the OK button to select it. The next two options are interval priority and focus before each shot. You can leave both of those off. We're going to be doing manual focusing for night photography anyway. Now that you've done these settings, they will still be here when you come back later. Because for now, we're going to go over camera settings. So touch your shutter button to get back to your main screen. Your interval and shooting time is going to depend on some of your camera settings. So we're going to go over those now and then come back to the time-lapse menu later. If you're not that familiar with night photography, I made an entire video for this camera on beginner night photography. When you're doing a time-lapse at night, you have to be in manual mode, which you are now. We're going to set ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. For your first shot, let's just set our ISO to 4000. To do this, just press the ISO button on top of the camera. Then while you got your finger still on the button, spin the back command dial. Let's change this to 4000. And while your finger is still on the button, spin your front command dial to make sure auto ISO is turned off. Now make sure your lens is all the way open. This way you get the most sky and the widest aperture possible. So once your lens is wide open, then spin your front command dial and let's get that aperture value down to 3.5. That's the widest aperture with this lens and it lets in the most amount of light. So those two settings you're going to use no matter what for your first time-lapse video. Now you're going to have to find a shutter speed that works for the conditions you have. If it's a full moon with snow, you could probably get away with a 3 or 4 second exposure. If there's a little bit of moon, you might get a 10 second. On a night with no moon and no clouds, you may have to shoot 25 or 30 seconds. But for this video, let's set our camera to a 10-second exposure. Just spin the back command dial until you see the inches symbols. Once you get the 10 inches, that means 10 seconds. Your camera's almost set up now for your first night time-lapse video. Just put your camera on a tripod and compose your shot. Next, we're going to have to use manual focus. So let's get our camera set up to manual focus. Press the I button, then scroll down to the area where it says focus mode and change this to MF. Now let's touch our shutter button to get back to your main screen. When you play with your focus ring, things will go in and out of focus, and you can use a flashlight to assist you. I made an entire video on manually focusing at night with the Nikon Z6II, so if you struggle with focusing at night, please watch that video. Now once you get your camera set up and you're in focus, all you have to do next is hit the menu button, go back to time-lapse movie, and choose Start. Once you choose Start, your camera is going to tell you it's preparing. Then it's going to begin shooting your time-lapse video. And you can tell it's shooting the time-lapse video because there should be a green light on the back of the camera that stays on. Once this green light goes away, that means your time-lapse video is done and it's ready for you to view. But let's say, for example, you only needed a 5-second shutter speed. Let's return to the time-lapse options. Hit the menu, choose time-lapse movie, and let's change our interval to 6 seconds. Now you notice at the bottom left-hand corner, with a 44-minute shooting time, we're going to end up with an 18-second video. If you only want a 10-second video, go back to shooting time, and then adjust the shooting time until you get the length of video that you want, which in this case will be 24 minutes. That's a much more reasonable waiting time. If you have one of those specialty night lenses, like the Nikon 20mm 1.8 aperture lens, you can set your aperture value to 1.8 and cut your shutter time in half. I put a link to this lens in the description below. If you're ever going to want to do those Milky Way time-lapse videos, you will have to upgrade to that lens because the kit lens just won't let in enough light to really capture the Milky Way. So once you start your time-lapse video, you're just going to have to kill 24 or 44 minutes depending on your shooting time. Once your video is complete, to watch the video, just hit the play button. Then it's going to show up on the back of your screen. Just touch the screen on the play icon, and you can see it right away. If you have the SnapBridge app, you can transfer the video from your camera to your phone immediately. Here are some important tips to make sure your time-lapse video looks great. You want to make sure your camera is level. The Nikon Z6II has a built-in leveler. To activate it, just hit the display button a few times. Eventually, you're going to see the screen with the leveler. Once it's green, your camera is level. And then hit the display button to go back to the screen that you like the best. You also want to have things that are moving in your time-lapse video, preferably clouds. And to add a lot of value, I also try to have a subject in my picture, like a house. It's a lot easier doing your first time-lapse video in an urban environment. This way your shutter speed may only be 3 seconds, so you only have to wait 15 minutes to get a time-lapse video. When you go on a dark sky night with no moon, no clouds out in the country, you may need a 20 or 25 second exposure, which means you're going to be waiting a full hour or longer to get a time-lapse video. You should also make sure your battery is fully charged when you're going to start a time-lapse. After all, your camera is going to be shooting for up to an hour. And when you're done your time-lapse video and you're ready to go home, don't forget to put your settings back. You should make sure you go back to autofocus. And then if you want, you can turn auto ISO back to on by hitting the ISO button and put the default ISO back to 100. Now your camera's already set up for tomorrow. If you happen to get some great time-lapse videos and you want me to see them, please tag me on Instagram if you post those. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please leave it in the comment section. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you get some great videos.